Hello and welcome to WION's live broadcast. I'm Kate Fisher, live in Washington DC, and these are the headlines of the hour. Shehbaz Sharif becomes the 23rd Prime Minister of Pakistan. To take oath this evening, there are claims that former PM Imran Khan's foreign plot accusations were a big drama. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi set to hold virtual talks with US President Joe Biden ahead of the 2+2 ministerial dialogue. India's position on the Ukraine war and its decision to buy discounted Russian oil could be discussed. French President Emmanuel Macron and his far-right rival Marine Le Pen prepare for a runoff in round 2 of the French presidential elections, which the opinion polls predict could be much tighter than their encounter 5 years ago. In China, Shanghai eases restrictions on some neighbourhoods after mounting outcry over inflexible COVID-19 rules that have locked down 25 million people, caused food shortages and left thousands in quarantine. Oil prices sink by more than 5% on Chinese demand, with fears arising from COVID lockdowns and on dimming hope of a European embargo on Russian crude. The Prime Minister of India and the US President will sit down for a virtual meeting in just a few hours from now. It comes as the defence and foreign ministers from both the nations are preparing for the annual meeting known as the 2+2 dialogue. India's Foreign Minister Anand Jaishankar and Defence Minister Rajnath Singh have arrived in Washington DC for the talks. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin from the US will hold in-person talks with their Indian counterparts on a range of issues. The 2+2 dialogue was launched in 2018 to deepen cooperation between the United States and India. The forum has also focused on improving bilateral relations and cooperation in Asia. It's part of Washington's strategy to counterweight China by having another ally in the region. The nations have almost always been on the same page, but this has changed since Russia invaded Ukraine. Ahead of the talks, New Delhi's press release has the usual statements about strengthening the comprehensive global strategic partnership with the United States. But Washington has a slightly different tone. The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has released a statement on the upcoming 2+2 talks where she mentions that mitigating the destabilising impacts of Russia's war against Ukraine, that's a quote from her. India and the US have had differing views over Ukraine since the war began in February. And while New Delhi has condemned the invasion and the brutality, it hasn't directly criticised Moscow. It's also abstained from all United Nations votes against Russia. India's accepted discounted oil prices offered by Russian firms after strict Western sanctions and embargoes. And it's received subtle warnings from the Deputy Treasury Secretary of the United States last week. Well, our correspondent Susan Tehrani is joining us now live from New York. Susan, what will be on President Biden's agenda when he speaks with Narendra Modi?
Well, as you rightly noted, we had a press released by Jen Psaki and the White House, and there was a slew of issues mentioned in that press release. It was interesting that the issue of COVID was also mentioned as it should be, so mitigating those challenges well, and a reminder that, of course, the COVID challenge is indeed with us and is something that the Biden administration and also Prime Minister Modi want to stress on. The issue of Indo-Pacific really high up on the agenda, but it was also noteworthy that a supply chain crisis and a food shortage issue is something that both sides are very concerned about due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that will also be on the agenda. That talk and that conversation is going to proceed, as you mentioned, a 2+2 meeting from the foreign minister of India and the defense minister with their counterparts here in the United States. And of course, that is also going to focus on the Indo-Pacific region, and a visit by the Indian defense minister to Hawaii, which is also a base for the Indo-PACOM, the largest and oldest combatant command, which is in charge of the Indo-Pacific region. So we know that President Biden and Prime Minister Modi will focus on that issue as well.
And what about this dispute, this difference of opinion over Russian oil? Is that going to compromise the Indo-US relationship? And how will Biden and Modi approach that in these talks?
Well, I think both sides have a strategic alliance, and they understand each other's position pretty well. I think President Biden and the West generally will have to understand that national interests of each country really come first in a lot of senses. And on the other hand, I think that they also would like to get as much verbal support as possible when it comes to dealing with Russia. Whether or not that's possible or not is another question. I mean, there are a lot of countries in Europe that they haven't been able to really get that kind of outspoken and verbal support from either. But I think because there is so much common ground between the two sides, we're really not going to see any kind of eruption, obviously. But on the other hand, I think that both men and both leaders know where both sides stand, and I think there's more common ground to focus on than differences. And I think that's, with everything that's happening right now and the challenges that both countries, as the biggest democracies that they're facing, I think they're going to be wise to focus on those.
Susan Tehrani in New York, thank you. Now, once considered neutral countries, Finland and Sweden could soon join NATO. NATO officials say that discussions about Sweden and Finland joining the military alliance have gotten extremely serious since Russia invaded Ukraine. NATO officials say that Russia's invasion has only served to reinvigorate the alliance. And that, of course, is the exact opposite of Russian President Putin's goals before the war began. Russia had demanded that NATO stop expanding eastwards and accused NATO of threatening Russian security. Public opinion in both Finland and Sweden about joining NATO has evolved since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin said last week that Parliament was set to discuss the issue within the coming weeks and will likely wrap up that discussion before midsummer. And the Swedish Prime Minister also did not rule out the possibility of membership in an earlier interview in March. The country is undertaking an analysis of security policy that's due to be completed by the end of May. based on which the government is expected to make its decision. Now, Moscow reacted to the developments, saying that it would have to rebalance the situation if Sweden and Finland were to join NATO. Our correspondent, Rosie Bouchard, has sent us this report from Brussels.
NATO has what's called an open door policy, and that essentially means, based on its founding document, that any European country that feels it can contribute to North Atlantic security has the right to apply to join the alliance. And that's something we heard reiterated over and over when Russia was demanding that Ukraine be barred from joining NATO. But when it comes to Sweden and Finland, the discussion really is entirely different, because now that we see public opinion changing in these two countries toward favouring NATO membership, we're seeing NATO allies take this even more seriously. And the difference here is that it's highly likely that among NATO allies, those 30 existing members of the alliance, it would be very likely that Finland and Sweden can secure support for their membership bid were they to indeed come forward and try to join the alliance. Now, let's be clear, Finland and Sweden are already partners of NATO. They're already highly integrated. We saw troops from both of those countries joining drills in Norway just a few weeks ago with NATO members. So this would be a major kind of political change, a shift in those Nordic countries. However, we do already have quite a significant level of integration and work with NATO countries from Finland and Sweden. They often, for example, join meetings of NATO here in Brussels.
Rosie Bouchard in Brussels. The Kremlin has now appointed a new general in commander of Moscow's special operations in Ukraine, following a massive shake-up of the Russian military leadership in Ukraine. General Alexander Dvorzhnik has now been appointed by President Vladimir Putin to lead all of Russia's operations in the country. He will lead the overall command of the Ukrainian operations in a bid to reboot the invasion. Now, General Dvornikov was earlier leading the Russian southern military district, and he is said to have led the Russian command during its operations in Syria. Experts believe the appointment signals a change in Russian operations on the ground, which have been facing several roadblocks so far. The United States has expressed concern about the new appointment by the Kremlin. Here is the full report.
Russian forces continued shelling targets in eastern Ukraine on Sunday, as Washington said it would meet Kiev's request for more military aid by providing the weapons it needs to defend itself against Russia. Russia has so far failed to take any major cities, but Ukraine says Russia has been gathering its forces in the east for a major assault and has urged people to flee. Since Russia invaded, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has pressed Western powers for military hardware and support and to punish Moscow with tough sanctions. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told ABC News Sunday, quote, "We're going to get Ukraine the weapons it needs to beat back the Russians to stop them from taking more cities and towns." Mounting civilian casualties have triggered widespread international condemnation and new sanctions. Russia calls its attack on Ukraine a special military operation and denies its soldiers have targeted civilians. But a grave with at least 2 civilian bodies has been found in a village near Kiev, a Ukrainian official said on Sunday, the latest such reported discovery since the Russian withdrawal from areas north of the capital. Ludmila Zabaluk, head of the Dmitrivka village department, said dozens of civilian bodies were found in the area.
There were more than 50 dead people. They shot them from close distance. There's a car where a 17-year-old child was burned. Only bones left. A woman had half her head blown off. A bit farther, a man lying near his car was burned alive.
Villagers in the Chernihiv region recalled surviving weeks of shelling by Russian forces from the cellars of their homes.
The shelling went through our house. My husband, children, and my daughter-in-law were all in the basement. We all ran out of the basement and started running in different directions to the road. All the while they were shooting at the neighbors' houses.
Sullivan said on Sunday he expected Russia's newly appointed general overseeing Ukraine, Alexander Dvornikov, to authorize more brutality against Ukrainian civilians.
To France now and the presidential elections. Early results after the first round of voting have put the incumbent president, Emmanuel Macron, in first place, ahead of his far-right opposition candidate, Marine Le Pen. More than 97% of the vote has been counted in the first round, and projections show that the 44-year-old political centrist Macron scoring 28 to 29%, with Le Pen scoring 22 to 24% of the total votes. Despite entering the campaign late and holding just one rally, Emmanuel Macron has performed slightly better than expected. If this is confirmed by official vote counts as the top two finishers, they will progress to a second round on April the 24th. The initial projections mean that France is staring at a repeat of the 2017 head-to-head contest. However, there's no guarantee this time that the outcome will be the same. The next pivotal moment in this campaign will come on April the 20th, when the two candidates will take part in a TV debate broadcast live on national television and watched by millions. The final debate has often had a crucial impact on the overall outcome of the election. Ahead of the debate, incumbent President Emmanuel Macron asked his supporters to make no mistake, as nothing is yet decided. He added that the debate over the next fortnight will be decisive for France and for Europe. Looking to face far-right nationalist Marine Le Pen, Macron has asked voters to, quote, block the extreme right.
Alors, durant les 15 jours à venir, ne ménageons aucun effort car rien n'est fait. Soyons humbles, déterminés. Allons convaincre chacune et chacun. Le 24 avril prochain, nous pouvons faire le choix d'une nouvelle époque française et européenne. Le 24 avril, nous pouvons faire le choix de l'espoir. Le 24 avril, nous pouvons faire le choix de la France et de l'Europe ensemble.
Well, on the other side is Marine Le Pen, who's bidding to be France's first female president. The French far-right presidential candidate has increased her first-round score from 2017. In the second round, she will pick up votes cast for her far-right rival, Eric Zemmour. If elected as the country's first woman president, Marine Le Pen has promised a seismic shift for France, both domestically and internationally. Entering the election's runoff, Le Pen has vowed to become the president for all. The 53-year-old candidate said that the runoff would present a fundamental choice between two visions. She said that the choice is between Macron's, quote, division in justice and disorder against her plan for social justice and protection.
Le peuple français s'est exprimé et me fait l'honneur d'être qualifié au second tour face au président sortant. Qu'il me soit permis d'exprimer aux millions d'électeurs qui m'ont témoigné leur confiance ma plus sincère gratitude. J'en mesure avec humilité toute la responsabilité.
Well, of course, the French election result will have wide international influence as Europe struggles to contain the havoc wreaked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Macron has strongly backed European Union sanctions on Russia, while Le Pen has worried about their impact on French living standards.
As France votes to elect a new president, it's Macron versus Le Pen again. Macron-Le Pen advanced to April 24th runoff. Pro-European economic liberal versus far-right nationalist.
Décisif pour l'avenir de la nation. Plus rien ne doit être comme avant.
Will Macron win a second term?
Le peuple français s'est exprimé et me fait l'honneur d'être qualifié au second tour face au président sortant.
Or will France choose its first woman leader?
The French president has himself admitted that this election...
WION gets you ground reports from Paris. French election 2022. WION continuous coverage.
Well, the candidates will face off again on April the 24th. Now, did you know that abandoned fishing gear is attributed to nearly 10% of the trash found in the world's oceans? With more insistent calls to limit global warming and reduce our carbon footprint, Australian fishermen are trying to make the rock lobster trade more environmentally friendly. One plastic-free fishing pot at a time. We'll leave you with this story. Thanks for watching us here in Washington.
This is Gary Ryan. He's a bit of a rock lobster fishing expert. After all, he's been doing it for over 30 years. But it is only recently that Gary realized the need to reduce his carbon footprint. He also realized that a big part of the problem was the lobster fishing pots that he had been using. Lobster pot is a trap to catch lobsters, and the necks of these pots are generally made of plastic. Gary has now taken it upon himself to make plastic-free necks and nets, and in turn lay the foundation for a more sustainable lobster trade.
No one's really tried to make a plastic-free net in the neck or lobster pot in the past because it's probably because no one's had the headspace because no one was aware of the problem.
Discarded fishing gear happens to be the deadliest form of plastic waste for marine life. As per a World Wildlife Fund report, they make up nearly 10% of the trash found in the world's oceans. And believe it or not, plastic necks from these lobster pots make up a large chunk of marine plastic waste. But fishermen like Gary are more than willing to make the switch and help reduce their carbon footprint. The idea is simple: better tools for a better catch and better environment. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
This is right, Arab.